Welcome to SLP 320, the anatomy and physiology of the speech and hearing mechanism. I'm going to give you some essential background information about the overall content that we're going to cover in this course. We're just basically going to get the bigger picture of what the systems are that we're going to cover, and then let's get some idea of some of the anatomical terms and reference points that we're going to be using across the entire course. So the first thing is just an introduction, trying to scaffold some of this knowledge. So an introduction to the systems that we're going to cover in this course. The first system that we'll cover is respiration, and that's the name of the system that we use for breathing. And we're going to be covering the main structures. And even though the respiratory system goes from the nasal and oral cavities all the way down through the trachea and the lungs, for purposes of the systems, we're primarily going to be talking about breathing as the lower respiratory tract, the trachea, the bronchi, and the lungs. Phonation is the system associated with adding voice to the airstream in order to generate one kind of component of sounds, which is the voicing of sounds. And that's done by virtue of the structure known as the larynx. So we'll be talking a lot about the system of phonation, or adding of voice to sounds. And then as that air comes up, we're going to shape it in the vocal tract, in the pharyngeal or oral and nasal cavities. And that's where we actually take all that air stream that's coming up and shape it into individual speech sounds. Those three systems make up the primary systems associated with the speech production mechanism. Now, once speech comes out, our listener has to hear it. So we have the system of audition, or the auditory system, and that is the system associated with hearing, and we'll cover a bit about that. Your section may or may not also cover the system of deglutition, which is known as swallowing. And the reason why we may cover swallowing is that it shares the same anatomy, and so it makes most sense to put it in this course. Now, the first three systems, as I said, relate to speech production: the respiratory system, the phonatory system, and the articulatory system. They relate to speech production, and the hearing relates to speech perception. So human communication, it is one of the most complex processes that human beings engage in. And paradoxically, it seems so effortless for the vast majority of people to engage in speech production and in human communication. You do it really with relatively no thought, unless you have a communication disorder, in which case human communication can become very, very taxing and one of the most complex things that you do. Now, this course is really about the anatomy and physiology of how do we get that job done of human communication. And it includes hundreds of muscles encompassing the entire thoracic cavity, the muscles of the neck, the muscles of the oral cavity and the head, and then the most important structure being the brain that's going to govern all of that. And that includes millions of nerve fibers and neurons and synapses. So human communication is incredibly complex, despite the fact that we really engage in it without any real thought per se about how it happens. Now, any kind of anatomical or physiological deviation in this system of the muscles and the nerves can result in a variety of different kinds of communication disorders. And we have many kinds of communication disorders. And that's beyond the scope of this class. But hopefully what you'll see across this class is that any problem in any one of these systems can manifest itself in a communication disorder or a speech production disorder. So for each of the systems that we will cover, we're going to cover the main structures, and we're generally going to walk ourselves through what's the framework of that system, what's the muscular activity, and then how does it all work in order to achieve speech production or perception or swallowing, if your course will cover that. But before we get there, we need to make sure that we're familiar with some basic terms and that we understand some of these terms. The first ones we'll talk about is just what these terms mean. So biology is the science or study of life and life forms and living organisms. And this course is a biological science course. And we're going to be talking about the study of human beings and the systems associated with speech production and perception. The term anatomy means the study of the structure of that organism. So it's the actual structures themselves, like the lungs, like the lips, like the tongue. And the physiology is the science dealing with the functions of those anatomical structures. So when we talk about the respiratory system, for instance, there are a number of anatomical structures like the lungs and the diaphragm. And then we'll be talking about the physiology or the function of those anatomical structures. So we'll be talking about how the diaphragm contracts and how it's going to pull open the lungs. That's the physiological components of those structures. So that's what those terms mean. We also need to familiarize ourselves with some anatomical orientations because I will be using them readily throughout this course. And it's probably good that you become familiar and a little agile with using these terms. So the term anterior means to the front and posterior means to the back. And you can see it on this right picture over here. The gentleman here, anterior is to the front and posterior is to the back. Superior is to the top. Again, we can see it on the gentleman. Superior is to the top, so your head is superior to your feet, and your feet are inferior to your head. So the term towards the top means superior, and towards the bottom means inferior. Now, something to keep in mind that I didn't say is that these terms are used in relationship to other structures. So when we say superior, we are generally referencing one structure in relationship to another structure. So the head is superior to the feet. The same thing with anterior. The belly button is anterior to the buttocks. Or the heels are posterior to the toes. Okay, so it's in relationship to anatomical structures, one anatomical structure in relationship to another. On the lady, we can see the terms medial and lateral. Medial meaning to the center or middle, medial meaning middle, and lateral meaning to the side. So the belly button is medial and the arms are lateral to the lateral side or lateral to the belly button. Proximal means closer to the body, and distal means further away from the center of the body. So proximal means closer to the center of the body, and distal means further away from the center of the body. Okay, so your calf is distal and your quadricep is more proximal to the center of the body. The term prone means lying on your stomach, and supine means lying on your back. Now, I think one of the ways to know this is remove the U from supine and we can see spine. So think about lying on your spine or lying on your back. Supine is you're lying on your back, and prone is lying on your stomach. So laying down, meaning laying down on your stomach, and supine means laying down on your back. These next two terms are once again relational terms, structures related to one another. Ipsilateral means the same side. So if I say my right arm is ipsilateral to my right leg, it means they're on the same side. Ipsi means same and lateral means side. Contralateral means to the opposite side, contralateral. Your right arm is contralateral to your left leg. So we would only use these terms when we're talking in relationship to other structures. My right shoulder is contralateral to my left shoulder, but my left hand and my left foot are ipsilateral to one another, meaning they're on the same side. The term adduct and abduct. Adduct means to add. Think of the word add. Adduct means to add. It means to bring two things together. So when you add two numbers together, you're bringing them together. So the term adduct means to bring two structures together. So if your arms are at your sides and you put your hands together, you're adducting your hands. If you pull them back out, you are abducting. Think about the word abduction. A child who is abducted from their home is removed from their home. And we're going to use those terms really only to refer to the vocal folds. When we bring them together to create voicing, we adduct them. And when we open them back up, we abduct them. Now, the next terms, hypo, hyper, infra, sub, supra, they're somewhat related to one another. Hypo, infra, and sub all mean below. So they reference something below. So hypoglottic means below the glottis. Subglottic means below the glottis. Hyper and supra mean above. So hyperglottic or supraglottic means above that area. So we use that as a prefix to another term. Hypotonic means below tone, limited tone. So we always use that as a prefix to another word. So I want you to stop and make sure that you practice those terms a little bit. Let's just try to review here. Your head is what to your feet? You should be thinking superior because it's above. Lying on your stomach puts you in a, and here you should be thinking about a prone position. Your belly button is, and here you would say medial to your hip bones because they lie at the same level. So they're more central, more towards the middle. So that would be medial. To bring two structures together is to, you should be thinking adduct them. Your left arm and your left leg are, this we would say is ipsilateral to one another. And as soon as I give directionality like left and left, we would probably say ipsilateral more than I would say one is superior to the other. Okay, so as soon as I give directionality of left versus right, you should be thinking about either ipsilateral or contralateral. And we are going to stop our review here.